episode 5, though, of the ABCs of CFB. We are kind of flip-flopping here these last couple of weeks. So 2 weeks ago, it was Chris and I. We skipped last week. We had a lot going on, and I'm in Florida for some of those listeners that don't know, and Hurricane Ian came through, so was dealing with that. And then this week, Chris had some work that took up his night here, so it's going to be Bryant and me this week, but excited to get back to getting these out. So we'll start off. Bryant, how are things? You've had some work travel and just a lot going on when it comes to your college football team. So how are things?
Yeah, no, happy to be back on here, back in American soil. Yeah, so sort of life led me astray from college football for a few weeks, which turned out to be nice with Michigan State being so bad. But I'm trying to be optimistic, trying to remain in it, and um, yeah, I think we've there's still been a lot of exciting things going on despite my Michigan State failures. But so um, excited for another Saturday.
Yeah, for sure. Same. It's been, like I said, a little chaotic last week. My family, my mom and stepdad, along with my sister and niece, they all live in Fort Myers, Florida. Hurricane Ian hit directly landfall as a Category 4. Should have essentially been a Category 5. It was like 5 miles an hour less than what a Category 5 hurricane is, and it hit
Jeez.
directly on Fort Myers. So it really was, and as well, a lot of listeners don't know this, or maybe they do, but I lived in Fort Myers for about 6.5 years, so close to my heart. And it was really sad to see just how much devastation is taking place down there. So I will, when I post our podcast for today, I'm going to put a link in there for anybody that wants to donate to one of the hurricane relief funds that I would recommend for you to utilize. So, but it is good to be talking back college football. College football thoughts of last week holistically before we get into talking about the theme of our podcast, which is the Big Ten, and the Michigan schools. The biggest takeaway that I really had was that Alabama looked back to being pretty darn good. Georgia survived a wild scare, which it was very surprising to me because I thought that Georgia wasn't going to have even remotely close to a game until they played Alabama in the SEC championship. Um, so that was a big takeaway. Ohio State looked pretty good as well. Still a little not sold on CJ Stroud. We'll see how they continue to develop, but there wasn't anything like huge, I felt like, that stood out from last week's slate. And admittedly, though, I wasn't following it quite as hard as I normally do. But Brian, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, no. Last weekend was the first time I jumped back in and watched a full slate of games. I had missed the previous week being in Germany, but it was an exciting slate. I think there was 9 top 25 teams that lost, so a lot of chaos. You had Clemson with the big win over NC State. I think that really puts them in the driver's seat for the ACC. Their offense is looking a little bit better. It's coming along. So Clemson is in a good spot. Georgia's game, it was just a weird game. 4-point win over Mizzou, who's not good. I think overall they dominated the game. There was some weird turnovers that made it a little bit closer than it should have been. So I'm not taking much from it, but it was definitely a weird game.
Yeah.
And then you had Okie State with a big win at Baylor. I think that puts
Yeah,
them in
that's right.
in the driver's seat for the Big 12 with Oklahoma losing. Texas has Ewers coming back, so maybe they
Yeah.
could put up a fight. And you always have my Kansas Rock Chalk Jayhawks undefeated. But I think Okie State with the best. I think they have the best quarterback in the Big 12 with Sanders. So I think they're in a good spot with that win over Baylor. And then my last one was just Washington losing to UCLA. I think that
Yeah, that was
shifts
shocking.
sort of the Pac-12. Is USC the only playoff hope they have? Does Washington or Utah have a hope? UCLA is still undefeated. I don't think they're great. I think they're kind of hard to beat, but I don't think they're that great. They're going to drop some games. So you're looking at it's probably USC is their last playoff hope for the West Coast. So Those were my big takeaways. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think you're starting to see some separation and the playoff picture coming into a little bit better shape.
Yeah, for sure. I totally forgot about that Washington game. I'd be curious to see though. Every team usually has. I mean, not there's what one, maybe two teams that go into the playoffs with an undefeated season. So there's usually a game that something like that happens. I still think Washington's better than that. I think UCLA is a pretty decent team. It's a little hard to see Zach Charbonnet be as good as he is, former Michigan transfer, but that's very unsurprising. I anticipated him being very good. But I think Michigan's just fine with their running backs right now. But yeah, that was my big takeaway as well. So I am interested though to see the Pac-12, and we'll talk more about the Pac-12 specifically, their playoff hopes when we get to my card. And before though we transition into talking about the Michigan and Michigan State games for this weekend, one thing that I wanted to talk about is really specific to Michigan State's game last week, which was this might be one of the only things that I've been hitting on the entire year, which was as the season progressed initially with Michigan State, I was the one that said, I just don't know if with the injuries and how Thorne might be looking a little up and down, they don't have K9. I remember on this podcast in week 2, I said it wouldn't be shocking to me to see them struggle against Washington, then Minnesota. Maryland's going to be pretty tough this year, and then Ohio State, Michigan, and I got laughed at, I believe, with you and Pooh and Chris. But that brings us to talking about Tucker. So we don't have Chris, but we do still have Bryant here to talk about it. There's 2 questions that I want to ask. I'll get your viewpoint and then I'll express my viewpoint. And this was actually something local radio talked about this week, which was how long should Mel Tucker have? Actually, sorry, this is before you even answer those questions, Bryant. I want you just to give me your very honest opinion on MSU and Tuck this season. And then the 2 questions are how long should he get to right this ship to prove what he is as a coach and what MSU's program is? And then the second part of that is how long do you think though that he will get to prove it? Like until there's actual pressure shown at him, like you got to win this year or blank, you're going to get fired. So
Yeah.
give me that thought process.
Yeah, no, I think just in terms of the season and how it's played out so far, like going into the seasons, you have sort of spectrums of how they could play out for your team. I think on the Michigan State side, I think rightly so, the upper end of that spectrum was another 10 to 11 win season. We had a lot of returning talent, a lot of new talent. I think that was a possibility. On the bottom end, the schedule is tough, so I think a struggle to start the season was a possibility. And then you compound that with the injuries that we've had and the schedule probably being harder than I think anyone had anticipated. I think Washington's turnaround was faster than people thought with a new coach, new quarterback, everything. Like that game was much harder than I think people anticipated.
Mhm.
We played Minnesota when they were at full strength with Ibrahim. That was tougher than anticipated. And I think Maryland's been so far having a better season than most people anticipated. So you have your schedule being harder than you thought. You have all of the injuries. And the way I look at it is if you put any team with our schedule and you take out their top 5 to 8 best players, a lot of teams are going to be 2 and 3, just like Michigan State is. So I think that's just the reality of it. But we talked about it a little bit. My biggest concern is I think it's starting to show a trend with Tucker where there's these blowouts and just lack of preparedness. Like from the kick, we just get blown out. Mel's very first game in the COVID year was against Rutgers. And from the opening kick, I think we had 7 turnovers. It was the ugliest football game you could have ever imagined, and we lost to Rutgers. You had the
Yeah.
Ohio State game last year, which everyone saw. You just get blown out on national television. It wasn't even close from the first quarter. And then same this year with Washington and Minnesota. I mean, we're in a 3-score hole before you can even blink. So I think it's a concerning trend, and why it's happening, and I'm not sure. The Jimmys and Joes, X's and O's. I don't know, but it's become, you have a sort of a 3 season sample now. It's become a trend that I'm concerned with. So it's unfortunate that we're on the lower end of the spectrum of expectations. I think rest of the season outlook, you have to see what you can do to make a bowl game and get that 6 wins. I think you have to beat Indiana and Rutgers to get to 4, and then you look at Wisconsin, Illinois, 2 other games that you should have a shot at, and then you just hope that you can get healthy enough that you can. I think we're still going to be dangerous. I think we're slowly going to get healthy. I think we're going to be dangerous. We're going to be a threat to Michigan and Penn
Oh
State
yeah.
when it comes time. I don't think we have any chance at beating Ohio State, but those other what 6 games, I think we're going to have a shot. So it's unfortunate, but I'm not going to overreact. I'm not going to join the national media's hot takes. It just stinks overall. And as a fan, you want to see all your best players. I was excited to see Xavier Henderson, Darius Snow, Jacob Slade, like all these guys play. And as a fan, it stinks. But that's the first question. And then the second question, I think, for any coach, when you're starting a new program, I think you have to at least give them 5 years. That gives them enough to have their own recruiting class, have their own players, have their own schemes, have everything mesh and in place, and then you can see how it plays out. So I think you got to give Tucker at least that. I will say, if this turns into a 2 to 3 win season, and then you do something less than make a bowl game next year, the hot seat is definitely there. Um, but at the same time, you can view last season as the first real season of Mel Tucker's tenure. His first year was just a few months where he didn't even get to meet his team, and his first 6 months on the job, everything was virtual with COVID. Players were out, season was shortened, etc. Couldn't recruit. So last year being the first real season, and then maybe 3 years after that. But my expectations internally is next year we should have a roster that has enough of his players, enough talent, enough depth to be able to compete in every game that we play.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay. All right. So you're saying then, just to make sure I heard those two parts, is how long should he get? You're saying 5 years. He definitely, and that would be then through the 2024 season that he would need to have a season to showcase like this is getting on track. You believe though that if they had a bad year this year, along with a 4 to 6 ish win total next year, then that would mean the following year would be a bit of a make or break year.
Yeah,
Is that what
yeah,
I'm hearing?
yeah, exactly. The other thing that I wanted to mention too is that we started talking about in the chat is sort of the philosophy of what Michigan State can be as a football program. You had that Mark D'Antonio strategy and philosophy to get Midwest rooted players with chips on their shoulders, passed over by Michigan, Ohio State. Have a coaching staff in place that you don't fire anyone. You build a chemistry, you build a system, and you keep that in place. And that was obviously wildly successful. Um, and so there's a train of thought where a program like Michigan State, that's the only way that they can compete at the national level. But at the same time, Mel Tucker's trying to do the Clemson route. He's trying to turn Michigan State into a national power, recruit nationally, recruiting players that aren't projects, but players that have NFL sort of archetypes,
Yeah.
that can compete with everyone. So as a fan, obviously I appreciated what Mark D'Antonio did, and it was an incredible tenure to watch. But I also am excited about Mel's vision, and I think it's possible that Michigan State can do the Clemson route. I think we've poured money into facilities, into our coaching staff, into recruiting, everything. I think it can work. But there's it's a risk that it can't work, and we can't get the right players in place, and that you'll be 5 to 6 years in Mel's tenure. You realize it can't work, and then you're 5 to 6 years behind, and
Yeah.
having to start from scratch. So it's definitely a big risk. But as a fan, I'm excited to see it. Because you want to be able to, we already made the playoffs. Now I want to see if we can have a program that can win the playoffs, and I think that's what
Yeah.
Mel's trying to do. I
Yeah.
don't think we were ever going to beat Bama with D'Antonio's sort of philosophy.
No, I mean, the only thing, and we've talked about this in the past, it's like of any type of team that's like that, and I would put Michigan's team last year in that category of what they were. And
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the funny dynamic here is that I think Harbaugh has had a bit of a realization of like this is who he is and this is what he kind of wants the Michigan program to be. Because even
Yeah.
JJ McCarthy, you know, he was passed up by Ohio State, Notre Dame, several other of those big tier schools to play at Michigan, and a lot of guys are like that. But anywho, back to like your original point, where I am curious is that next year, and correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't this a little bit of an older team? Like, does Michigan State lose a bunch of guys off of this?
It's a great question, and I honestly have no idea with the whole COVID-free year and all the
Yeah,
transfers. It's really tough to say what eligibility is. I think on offense, we would for sure return Thorne, Broussard, Berger, so your whole backfield, every wide receiver except for Jaden Reed, every
yep.
tight end except for Barker, and every lineman except for Horst.
And then defense, it would
And
just be
then
kind of a hodgepodge.
defense, I think everyone comes back except for Henderson and Slade.
Okay. So I mean, there's certainly talent that you would hope gets developed. I guess I was just curious about, you know, some of those guys that you've just named. I mean, those would be significant losses on any team. And what I'm trying to get at is that I just don't know if it's a certainty that next year would be a very good year. You know, I think you guys have another, you know, you play similar teams again, you know, it's
Hmm.
just flip-flopping where you're playing them at. And I have now gotten to the belief that unless you have a D'Antonio style team or Michigan last year, I I don't know that you can win unless you have an elite quarterback, you know, and I think Michigan is hoping that JJ develops into that to take them to the next level. And I think Thorne is a fine quarterback. I don't know if he's that type of level. So I
Yeah.
think that's honestly what Michigan State will have to get to is, hey, can you guys bring in kind of that Drake May type of quarterback that kind of transcends the program and takes you, or you use the Clemson example. Deshaun Watson comes in, even
Yeah.
before him, Taj Boyd, you know, and then it kind of evolves from there. So I agree with you. I just, you know, I'm hot take guy and a Michigan fan. I just sort of think that Tucker's shtick is just a little bit played, and you know, we'll see. I mean, he's taking the approach that Harbaugh did at the beginning of his tenure at Michigan, didn't recruit at all in the Midwest, didn't really prioritize a lot of guys in Michigan, took a lot of out of region kids. And the only other thing he's doing that's different than Harbaugh is prioritizing the portal. So you guys have had certainly some wins there, but you've had a couple of losses in the portal too, in the sense that maybe those guys aren't quite as good as you had anticipated. So we'll certainly see. I think I agree with you that he should get 5 years. And we're on the same page that if he struggles next year, then I can't imagine that the following year wouldn't be make or break. But I don't know what make or break is, you know. I don't
I
know.
think it would look really different if he wasn't so wildly successful last year. I think
Yeah.
we exceeded all timelines and expectations last year, so that makes this look worse. But when you break down the roster, I mean, like we've talked about it ad nauseum, the roster that he took over was so bad that you knew it was going to be a 3 to 5 year turnaround. It just so happened you struck gold in the portal and you win some lucky games last year, and then all of a sudden it's 11 wins, and you think that's the new standard, when that's not where we're at just as a program.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll certainly, this leads perfectly into our next point, which is talking MSU and U of M's matchup, which this will be very similar to what happened with Chris and I last time we spoke, which we focused a lot of the conversation on MSU's matchup, not a lot on Michigan, just because Michigan has a pretty easy team that they're playing. Sorry, Lucas, my brother-in-law, he went to IU, big IU guy. But we'll start with Michigan State. So Michigan State is playing at home to Ohio State. Right now, I see them at plus 24, but I don't know if that's
It's rising, yeah.
yeah. So I'm going to keep this brief on my thoughts on it. This is just again, I very much, Bryant, agree with you for Michigan State the rest of the year in the sense that if they do get some of these guys back, they will certainly put up a battle against Michigan. They will put up a battle against Penn State. That term you said, dangerous, I very much agree with. This, however, is the worst matchup for them. I
Yeah.
mean, it just everything about it is bad. And you take into account that Ohio State's defense is better than they were last year. It's just it has the recipe. I think the thing that you kind of got to hope for is that it rains like heavily on Saturday, so maybe CJ doesn't throw the ball as much. But that's where my take is. So
Yeah.
I don't have it on my card, but if I did, I would actually take. Oh, actually, you know what? I'm not going to say. I'm kind of leading into it. I thought I didn't. I do have this on my card for the weekend, so I won't give you a pick. But I think you guys can kind of hear where my head's going on that. So
Yeah.
Brian, why don't you break this down fully for us though?
Yeah, the line started at Ohio State minus 23, which I would have jumped all over. I didn't get it in time, but yeah, I think this is a game. It's just a horrible matchup. We have no shot at winning. But what, as a fan, what I want to see out of it is I want to see a team that's prepared and playing to win. And that's not what I saw, the past few weeks. So like the things that we're not doing, like I talked about it in the chat, but you go into Washington, who has an elite passing attack. You win the coin toss, you defer and let them have, or you choose to kick and let them have the ball first. They go right down the field, score. You're in a huge hole. You do the same thing against Minnesota. So you're playing to your weaknesses. You're letting the other team dictate momentum, take advantage of your weaknesses and putting you in a hole. So I want us to see us play to our advantages as best we can. I think the pass game is probably the only our best strength right now. So I want to see us win the toss, go on offense, and try to push the ball down the field, try some trick plays, try some creativity in the offense. We haven't seen any reverses. I think we saw like a really bad flea flicker once this year.
Yeah, you not really any flea flickers at all this year. That was kind of
Not
like you'd see
yeah, not
like
even
one a game it felt like last year.
yeah, not even it doesn't even have to be a flea flicker, but some type of creativity on offense to try to manufacture a big play, get some momentum. We haven't done any of that this year. And then you unforced penalties. We've had way too many of them. Got to take care of the ball. Like, so just the things that are well coached, prepared team. That's what I want to see. We're not going to have the athletes to compete. I expect us to lose. I expect Stroud to be able to throw it around, and it's not going to be not going to be pretty. It's going to be ugly. But just if I want to see the team ready to play and playing to try to win the game, try to take some shots, try to get some momentum, and see what happens. So um, I'm not super looking forward to watching the game, but I'm going to watch it and hope those things come true.
Yeah, I will say I know people might scoff at this, but I was actually surprised at Michigan State last week, especially given the injuries. And you and I will have to put a caveat on this. You and I differed on our opinion of Maryland. And then last night I talked about SMU being a decent team and they got absolutely smacked by UCF. So, however, what you saw in a Michigan State team that was decimated by injuries, playing on the road, was that they fought. They fought the entire game, and I still think Maryland is a decent team. They're a bowl eligible team. At least that's what I think that they're going to be this year. And had Michigan State not just completely blown it in the second half, I really think that they win that game.
Yeah.
So
No,
that if they play with that type of intensity, I think that they might. I think a win for Michigan State this weekend, if they can somehow cover this spread and even win by less than or lose by less than 20, I think that is like a huge win. A huge
that,
win.
that'd be a huge win. I sign me up for that every day of the week.
Yeah.
But on the Maryland thing, because I've seen that narrative out that people are like, oh, maybe the defense did some things in that second half. You look at that game, and in the first half, Maryland scored at will, pretty much every possession. I think they punted twice, but it was like weird 3-and-outs where Maryland was just being dumb. Other than that, they drove 4-minute offense at the end of the second half, drove the ball right down the field and scored. It slowed down in the second half, I think, partly because of their play calling. They were being conservative, but it also started to rain. So obviously their passing
Yeah.
attack's not going to be as prolific. So I didn't take away as many positives from that game, also because I think Maryland's bad. But But yeah, you just have to have low expectations because we're playing with second and third teamers on defense for the most part, and it's just not gonna be a good outcome no matter what.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, I'll tell you guys where I'm leaning on that in my card. But when it comes to our next game of the weekend, it's University of Michigan minus 22 and a half at IU. A very tough road environment, Indiana. I do actually, I'm a little bummed just how this year played out with like the amount of travel that my wife and I have because um, had we been like in a bit of a normal year, probably would go to this game at Indiana with her brother and their family. And I've actually heard wonderful things about like the tailgate scene in Bloomington.
Yeah,
So that would have been probably pretty fun. But oh well, maybe in the future. But we could start talking just briefly about last week. So we had a little bit again of a difference of opinion, but I know Iowa is usually a tough place to play. On review of the game, I will admit, like Iowa is not a good team. They are significantly worse than they were last year, and I certainly think that Michigan being not putting that game away when they could have or should have is a little bit concerning because when you watch it back, they were up 7-0. JJ misses Roman Wilson wide open in the end zone. That's 14-0 on their first two possessions. Like
yeah,
I have to imagine it would be tough for Iowa to like climb back in that game. And they kind of stuck around. I also think it's hard for you to say that like Michigan's defense did anything that would be considered a positive because Iowa, I mean, they are really, really that bad when it comes to their offense. They're that bad.
yeah,
So when you talk about this game this weekend with Indiana, I Indiana has the I forgot what I said in this our chat, but it's like 108th ranked pass defense in the country, and they have one of their tackles is statistically the worst when it comes to giving up quarterback hurries and sacks. So this is a game where if Michigan chooses to run Blake Corum 25, 30 times, I'm going to be a little bit like deflated. I'm not going to lie.
yeah,
I think if they do want to reach that peak as you've talked about and they've even talked about, which is a national title, they need to be like this kind of dynamic explosive offense. They need to air it out, and if they can't do it against Indiana, then I'm color me skeptical for the rest of the year. I'm going to share one item here because we're going into a little bit of a new dynamic with the podcast and the listeners. But this was a play last week that I'm like, why in the world do they not try to do stuff like this more often? So, Brian, can you see it?
yep,
Okay. So this is a play where the Iowa defense is playing their standard cover two. They drop their two safeties deep. Their cornerbacks are playing off, but this is a play where JJ is going to kind of give a little pump fake to hold this defender. The safety then drifts back, and he just throws what I would say is like an NFL level ball here. And I'm like, okay, pretty
yeah,
nice throw.
yeah. That was like the one downfield pass that he had all
And
game.
that was it. And I'm
Yeah,
like, why in the world? So I'm gonna hope just very briefly that this is just them. I'm hopeful, just playing it conservative or whatever you might call it. If it doesn't happen this week, I might be a little bit have to readjust my expectations of Michigan. So to that end, it's U of M minus 22 and a half. I'm gonna say that they do cover that because I am very much hopeful that they're going to kind of air it out because there's just no reason to run Blake Corum that much, um, given the opponent. And we need to
yeah.
save him against the Michigan State, the Penn States, and the Ohio State. So that's my take. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no. So I think we're completely aligned. I think Indiana is not very good, and it's just a bad matchup for them. They can throw a little bit with Bazelak or however you say their quarterback's name, and they got some talented receivers, but it should be a Michigan blowout. But yeah, I mean, in terms of Michigan, so I've watched most of all their games this year, and the two games that they played against real teams in the Maryland and in Indiana or Iowa game, I've just been pretty underwhelmed. And yeah, even last week, I was watching that game, and if you're not knowing who the quarterback is, I could think, is that Caden McNamara back there?
Yeah.
All they were doing is little tight end dink and dunks, and yeah, not pushing the ball down the field at all. So the only thing that I could think of is they weren't even allowing him to do like read options where he was a runner. They didn't let him do anything. So the only thing that I can think of is after the Maryland performance and where he was just truly a turnover machine. They just aren't, they don't have the trust level yet to let him truly air it out. But I fully agree that if they want to reach their peak, they're going to have to do that. I think they've relied too much on Corum to this point. I don't think he's a bell cow that can do it 25 times every game like Haskins could. And if he gets injured, especially with Edwards not being 100%, it could be trouble. So I think this is the game that yeah, they should try to get some momentum, get some timing down in the passing game. Yeah, as they get into the tougher part of the schedule with Penn State coming up, I think this is when they need to do it.
Yep, I agree. All right. So then we can go into talking about our picks for the weekend. So I was saying this beforehand. I have been on quite a cold streak. I had a proclamation that I was now the Oracle. Since that proclamation, I am 2-8 since that time. But we're gonna rebound this week. I was so close to going 5-0. I went 1-4 last week, but every one of my bets like that I lost missed by like a point. I swear it was I
Yeah.
was close. So maybe this is the week that we turn it around. But I'll quickly go through mine and then I'm going to defer over to Brian. I have a little summary of each pick here that I'll read through. So my first pick, and it is indeed my lock of the weekend, it is going to be Washington State plus 13.5 against USC. So USC has Utah on deck. And that is a pretty massive look ahead opponent for USC.
Is it
Who
at
all
is that Pullman?
correct? Yep. And so while USC has the likes of Caleb Williams, Jordan Addison, Travis Dye, and they are certainly putting on a show offensively. Same can't be said yet for the Trojans defense. It's been fortunate with a little bit of turnover luck, but you have to imagine regression is going to come against better teams as conference play is going to continue. The Trojans have the 57th ranked defense, but won't be able to get away with that surrendering 400 yards every week.
Yeah.
Washington State has already won outright as double-digit underdogs this year, and I expect a strong effort from the Cougars here. Offense should be humming because as of late, that didn't change against California last week. They put up 107 points over the last 3 games, despite the fact that they have 6 turnovers in the last 2 games. Their quarterback, Cameron Ward, is playing well. Rest of the offense is still due for some positive turnover regression. So hopefully in this spot, I like Washington State to move it on USC. And I may, who knows, put a little money line play here on Washington State. But I certainly like them to cover 13.5.
I like
My
it.
next my next game is Kansas State -2 against Iowa State. It feels like this line is a little suspicious, but Kansas State, I like them here and just how they're playing. Matt Campbell has an awful track record in games where he is a favorite by 3 points or less, and that didn't change last week with with their opponent. Actually, I didn't even write down who it was, but I had it shown that they were a 3 point favorite and they lost or they didn't cover. But poor coaching decisions aside, the Wildcats are simply better than Iowa State, and that's in literally all areas. So they have a great ground game. They have a great offense where they're doing a lot of play action with Adrian Martinez, and compare that to Iowa State's defense, which is 64th in EPA per rush. You'll find a clear advantage to Adrian Martinez running ability during this game. So overall, given Kansas State's momentum and their offense specifically against Iowa State's defense, I like Kansas State to cover -2. My third game is unfortunately Ohio State minus 24 against Michigan State. I put here OSU has the best passing offense in the country, and MSU has nearly the worst. This game is about pride, certainly, but at the end of the day, OSU is truly the worst, or OSU is truly the worst kind of matchup for Michigan State. 24 points is a lot, but OSU has too much firepower on offense for this one to be close. I'm not seeing the same thing as last year, but I'm seeing this as being a 45-17 type of game. We'll see what Tucker is made of after this week. And what I mean by that is if it's another blowout loss, like he could start losing the team a little bit. So this is where his coaching skills are going to come into play. Fourth game is Tennessee -3 at LSU. Playing at LSU is no easy task, regardless of the opponent. However, I'm calling a bit of BS here on exactly who LSU is. They have a lot of okay players across the board. In fact, I'm surprised Brian Kelly has been able to ride that ship to a 4-1 start. But Tennessee is coming into the game looking for a decisive win. Too much high-powered offense and too little on LSU's side for this one to go LSU's way. I like UT to cover -3. And then my last game is Mississippi State -9.5 against Arkansas. And I started this out by saying verbal meme Will Ferrell is in Zoolander whispering into the ear of Brandon Walker, who of Barstool Sports, who is a huge Mississippi State fan. That Mississippi State is so hot right now. The Bulldogs are coming off of a dominant victory over Texas A&M. Will Rogers and Mike Leach's offense should see more success against a porous Arkansas defense that is reeling as of late. Flip side of the coin, it's uncertain if Arkansas's quarterback KJ Jefferson is even going to play. Therefore, it's hard to see the Razorbacks pulling off this upset on the road. So ultimately, for those reasons, I have Mississippi State covering that game at 9.5, even though that is a lot.
Yeah.
Those are my 5. And now I will defer over to you, Bryant, to give me your 5.
All right.
Yes.
Yeah, so some picks will go against you here, but so start off the first one, lock of the week. I have Michigan -22.5, -23. I don't know exactly what it is now, but I think they do, like we mentioned, open it up a little bit. I think the offense will click more explosive plays, and I think they're going to blow out Indiana, who's bad. So I've got that. I had it at -22.5, lock of the week. Okay. My second one, so going against your last pick there, so I'm taking Arkansas +9.5. I think it's too many points. I think Arkansas is talented. I think they're reeling a little bit, but they gave Bama a big fight last week. They made him sweat there in the second half. It's going to come down to if KJ Jefferson plays or not. He didn't finish the Bama game, but it sounds like he's on track to play. So I think they're going to keep it at least. I like Mississippi State and what they have going on, but I think Arkansas State's going to keep it within a touchdown. So I like them +9.5. Third one, I got Kentucky -6 at home versus South Carolina. South Carolina is not very good. Kentucky had just a demoralizing loss last week at Ole Miss. I think Mark Stoops and Will Levis are going to bounce back, and they're going to beat South Carolina by at least a touchdown. So I like the Wildcats there. Fourth one, I've got, so Iowa is going to Champaign to play Illinois. The over-under is currently 36. Both defenses are very good, but I also think both offenses are starting to figure it out a little bit more. Iowa had 25 or 250-ish yards against Michigan. They had a few others. They could have scored more without some bad penalty luck. So I think they're figuring some things out on offense, and I think Illinois is as well with Chase Brown. So I like it to be over 36 there. And then my fifth and final one. So this one I don't love. This is more of a gut feeling, but my head's telling me no. I've got A&M to cover +24 against Bama. A&M is reeling right now. I think they have some injuries, but I think with sort of the coaching history and bad blood mixed with, is Bryce Young fully healthy? Is he even going to play? What's Bama going to look like? I think A&M can keep it within 3 scores. So I've got A&M to cover +24 as my fifth one.
Okay, what was your fourth one? Because I'm missing one.
Iowa at Illinois over 36. Kentucky -6 for South Carolina, Arky +9.5, Michigan -23, -22.5.
That'll be interesting if that Iowa-Illinois one hits. Although Illinois actually looks like a decent team this year. It's kind of wild. I would have never anticipated.
The job Bielema has done there is just masterful, and they just blew Wisconsin out of the water last week.
Yeah. Nice. Well, I like all of those. We'll, for the listeners, try to get something from Chris to put up with him. But yeah, it should be an interesting weekend. I'm excited to watch a few of the games, certainly. But any last thoughts, Bryant, before we wrap up week 6?
No, just keep the Michigan State players in your T's and P's, and hopefully they can make it out of this weekend alive without too much embarrassment.
There we go. Yeah, I will certainly be watching that. But thanks everybody for listening. As I said at the beginning of our show, I'm going to put a link in when we post this one for donations for Hurricane Ian down in Southwest Florida. And I would greatly appreciate it if you guys can donate to that cause. So thanks again for listening. We will talk to you guys next week. Good luck with your bets and have a great weekend.